There would, of course, be a limit in the capacity to borrow from the developers. And if you do the math, you can't really get ahead too far unless there's some changes made to access to capital, and particularly for the developers. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you. And now over to MP Blakey for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I too would just like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm interested in the question. There, I think it's well established that Canada needs more housing supply, but we've heard here today, and we've heard at other times in front of this committee, that there's also something's been happening on the demand side of the equation. So, Mr. Butler was talking about short-term rentals as a relatively recent phenomenon and the impact on the housing market. We've heard that homes are being used in some cases as a way to store cash. We've seen long-term investors get into the market and they want to raise rents in order to be able to get the most return on investment over the life of the asset. We've also heard that during the pandemic, people wanted more space. They thought maybe they were going to be stuck in their homes forever. Certainly felt that way sometimes. And so they wanted bigger yards. They wanted, and so there was a lot of movement in the real estate market. And I know, Ms. Farah, you also talked about some of these phenomena. I'm wondering if there's anything. I'll start with Ms. Farah because she's with us virtually. If you want to add anything to that list of kind of new demand pressures or different demand pressures that have been pressing upon the Canadian housing market.
Well, I think others have spoken about the, is there something wrong with other saving vehicles that are making people turn to property as an investment? So people seem to be leaving, savings in the stock market behind, or they're doing both. But I think there's a rush towards investing in property as a commodity that seems safer. So maybe there's something about income security that can be improved that would have people motivated to not be investing in housing as a profit-making piece. I think there's a lot of other things going on for people as well in terms of just figuring out where we can extract public benefit as opposed to creating profit for the well-being of people in a broader sense that affects everybody. So we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same country. Can we see that as we have rental units in our homes? Do we need to charge the top dollar? Is there a way that we can acknowledge landlords who don't charge top dollars? There's many stories of compassionate landlords who see that person living in their house as a member of their family in a sense, and just promoting that sense of community instead of greed and profit might, bit of a pipe dream, a bit of kind of rhetoric, but maybe there's something to it.
Thank you, Ms. Fair. Ms. Farah, is there anything that you want to add to that list of demand pressures?
I think there's some new areas of investor demand that we would be well in this country to understand and be concerned with. One of the areas is student accommodation. We're learning that students are having a very difficult time both paying for tuition and paying rent. And that in many cities, Halifax is a really good example. I have a daughter there right now. In many cities, it's the rent that's more unaffordable than the tuition. And what worries me is that the answer that a lot of people give is, well, build more student accommodation, more supply. And again, I push back against that without regulated supply, because what I've seen in countries around the world, and my expertise is international as well as domestic, is investor companies building and buying units for students and just charging exorbitant rents. So it means that student housing is available, but it ends up being still unaffordable. And I mean like incredibly exorbitant. And some of the buildings are amazing. They've got ping pong tables and cafes and swimming pools and running tracks and et cetera, but they are unaffordable, which of course increases differences in outcomes, learning outcomes for those students that can't afford the exorbitant rents. They live further away from campus. They're often already working a job, and so it makes it more difficult for them to achieve. The other area, what I won't go into any detail, is of course long-term care homes. And there is obviously, as we have an aging population, there's going to be growing need, and that is a huge investor area. And long-term care homes are both expensive and deplorable, as we learned at the beginning of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr. Butler, I'm come back to you on this question, but also curious to know if you have a sense of the size of inventory that might be put back on the market if government were to do as you suggest and ban short-term rentals. Do you have a sense of how many units we'd be talking about, or family homes?
Sure, you're looking at least 100,000 units, and immediately, that is something that would come on stream within the course of 1 year. Let's face it, if you can't make money on your short-term Airbnb, you're going to find a way to get out of it, and it'll become on the market just that quickly.
And do you have a sense of what that might do to prices in the market if you had that much inventory come on the market at one time?
The fear of it is also is actually causing reductions in Toronto pricing right now, today, as we speak. The prices of very tiny condos has started to drop as people unload them because their belief is that there will be further restrictions on Airbnb. The City of Toronto developed restrictions, and the response to that has been the sale of these units. And as we've observed it in the last 6 months, prices of those micro units have come down steadily. So this is a very immediate and a very effective tool that can be used.
Okay, thank you.
MP Blakey, witnesses, members, we're moving into our second round of questions. Just the timings are a little bit different in this round, and we're starting with MP Lawrence for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to start by sharing my time with Jaz Raj Singh Halan.
I just wanted to put a motion on notice. We know that after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canada has a cost of living crisis. Canada is life is more unaffordable than ever before. Given that the Governor of the Bank of Canada confirmed that the carbon tax is inflationary, we know it makes food more expensive because if you tax a farmer who makes the food and you tax the trucker who ships the food, ultimately the person who buys the food gets that tax passed on to them. We also know that it makes the cost of gas and home heating more expensive. The Prime Minister just currently did a massive flip-flop where he gave 3% of Canadians a pause on the carbon tax on home heating in Atlantic Canada, where his poll numbers were tanking. So given that, I want to put this motion on notice that the committee immediately undertake a 5-meeting review of the federal carbon tax and its impact on affordability, and that the committee invite the Minister of Finance to appear on this matter. Thank you. I'll turn my time back over.
Thank you. And I'm going to start my questions to Ms. Kismet. Of course, we've heard, we had the Governor of the Bank of Canada, we've also heard other testimony that the fiscal policy of this Liberal government is driving up inflation. We also heard that the carbon tax, as my colleague just mentioned with the motion, is driving up inflation. Actually, a third of inflation above target, he attributed directly to the impact of the carbon tax. If, in fact, we were to get back on target, so we were to bring down interest rates, inflation back down to 2%, and interest rates were to return to what they were pre-pandemic, so say 2%, if you will, as the bank rate, would that help you build more affordable housing?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. Many of the projects that are currently on hold are on hold precisely because of inflation and the cost of borrowing, and undoubtedly those projects would be viable once again if inflation was reduced.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to just ask some questions of Ms. Tour as well. Mr. You began your conversation or your discussion with talking about the lack of supply and taxes, and then of course you've got some recommendations. So I want to talk a little bit about same question actually Mr. Chambers asked Mr. Butler, but if we were able to allow electronic verification, for example, having the CRA verify with the permission of the taxpayer, would that be helpful to you?
Certainly it would be. So that is actually one of our requests that we've submitted in our pre-budget submission to this committee. And we are in discussions with the Canada Revenue Agency. To my understanding, the department is already working on a solution that we would support across industry, across the industry. And interestingly, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions recently indicated their support for independent income verification as well on mortgage applications.
Thank you. Because you brought up the regulators, are you finding that the regulators are working together and making it easy or cohesive, or do you see any issues with the regulation of the mortgage industry?
I would say that at least at the federal level, the regulators do speak to one another on a regular basis. Currently, we are aware that the Competition Bureau is doing a study on the stress test and the impact on transfers, switches, and renewals. We have also been in touch with the Competition Bureau and OSFI on this matter. Interestingly, they recently clarified in a publication on October 16th that for insured mortgages, that the stress test is not required for transfer switches and renewals. So we'd like to see the same for, as Mr. Butler mentioned, for homeowners in the uninsured space.
Thank you for that, and that was exactly my next question. So you answered two questions in one there, so that's great. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. Thank you very much for the witnesses. Really appreciate all your testimony.
All right, thank you, MP Lawrence. Yeah, we're just coming up at the end of time. So over to MP Weiler, please, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I think P.S. Bendayan will be taking the slot.
P.S. Bendayan.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to my colleague Patrick. I have a question for the representative from the municipalities of Quebec. Thank you very much for your presentation and the information that you've previously shared with us. I'd like to hear you on the announcement made by Minister Fraser recently that the agreement has been concluded and closed between Quebec and on the Rapid Construction Fund. We're all waiting with bated breath the ratification of this agreement and its implementation. $900 million, I believe, is what you mentioned, and what's your view on the adequacy of that amount for building in Quebec? Well, thank you very much. As I did note in my remarks, it's an excellent bit of news that we succeeded in concluding an agreement between Quebec and the federal government. These are significant sums, and municipalities were very much looking forward to getting a share of that. They have a number of projects in the works, and I think it's an excellent example of the collaboration that is possible when the will is there. It's good when you can close a gap between the various orders of government, and we can accomplish great things. Well, thank you very much, Madame Fournier. You also spoke of the need for 4,500 social units in Quebec per annum. Yes, per annum. I met with Quebec representative last week from Maison Cartier in Saint-Barnabé. They announced some new housing for the homeless. Is that included in the social housing, of course, in Quebec, or what's the situation in Quebec? Well, 4,500 new units per year for the extreme vulnerable, and we need more, of course, that are just simply, quote, affordable. We should like to see a greater part that is specifically targeted to these vulnerable populations. The purchase of actual lots or land is a responsibility of the municipality through the province, of course. Now, is it possible to use federal money to purchase land? And would this be perhaps useful tool? Which program are you referring to, madam? The rapid housing or the accelerated housing construction program or initiative? Yeah, the acceleration fund. Well, the application is a little bit different in Quebec because the agreement has been signed and that conditions are a little bit different in Quebec. Well, any comments that you could share with the committee as to the appropriateness? Well, I'm glad to hear that the agreement has been signed. It's nice to see that the federal government was quite open and flexible in the differences, the variance with the application in Quebec. We understood that the program in other provinces elsewhere in Canada have very specific criteria in order to receive the assistance and support. Since the 13th of October last, we know that there's 900 million that has been agreed to, but as to the terms and conditions and modalities of implementation, those are getting clarified as we go. Precise as for the purchase of land, as Madame Fortin was saying, it will probably be applied a little differently in Quebec. One of the major demands from the municipalities is to build housing, targeted housing, affordable housing. Now, all of those issues are very significant factors, of course, in order to get the houses built.
To MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thanks again, Chairman. I would like to continue asking questions of our witness, the Mayor of Longueuil. Now, I believe that land is sold at market value in Quebec, or it can be at a reduced price if the purpose of it is for social housing. Federal lands in Quebec could be a part of the solution. In the Ottawa, Quebec, for the 900 million, we also are very anxious to see what the details will be. You did indicate that the National Housing Strategy in Quebec, 13% of that budget was accorded to Quebec, whereas you represent 20% of the population. You know, there's quite a time lag between the announcement that that money is going forward to a certain purpose and its delivery. So, you spoke of flexibility and agility of various programs, and that these be well integrated with Quebec programs or adapted to them. Can you talk to us a bit more about it, especially in terms of social housings, and what more could Ottawa do to smooth the path? Thank you. Well, it took a little bit more time to come to an agreement between federal and Quebec governments on the 900 million CCBF. But we're hearing very positive feedback from the announcement, and we hope that that flexibility will be applied productively. Another program that succeeded quite well that I did allude to in my presentation is the initiative for rapid housing development and construction. It's become a very tangible program in our municipalities. And it can help to integrate the funding and financing of social housing thanks to this particular fund, the co-investment fund. However, in the last federal budget, there was no mention made of this initiative, which is unfortunate because it was a very good fit between the Quebec applications and the federal contribution. We'd like to see it to be as effective as it can, and maybe we could find perhaps eventually, if the results are positive enough, we won't need to continue subsidizing forever. However, we'd like to meet the needs that are there. Thank you.
Much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Tour, Scotiabank has published a report that says Canada's social housing stock is about 3.5% of Canada's entire social housing stock, and that we need to double it in order to just meet the OECD average. And when asked a question about these numbers in the House of Commons, the Conservative leader said that Canadians don't want a Soviet-style takeover of housing. And I'm wondering if you agree with the Conservative leader that Scotiabank's proposal to double social housing amounts to a Soviet-style takeover of housing in Canada.
So I'd have to apologize as representative of a mortgage industry association. I don't think I'd be the best person to speak to non-market housing. So perhaps you may want to direct that question to one of the other witnesses.
Well, I'm happy to have anyone take that question. Is there anyone who agrees that Scotiabank is advocating for a Soviet-style takeover of housing in Canada? I mean, I certainly have an opinion on the matter, but it seems to me not to be an apt description of Scotiabank's work on social housing. So we'll maybe just leave it at that for now. Un autre commentaire par le chef des conservateurs, c'est qu'on...
Another comment from the Conservative leader. We should perhaps penalize or sanction municipalities that don't build enough social housing. Do you think that municipalities will abide with these threats from a potential federal government on housing issues? And if not, what type of federal partner are you expecting, and what kind of approach from the federal position would give more positive results in matters of social housing? Well, as I did mention, it's quite clear that municipalities also have a great responsibility to facilitate and ease the construction of the social housing. We're close-knit, we're close to the population, and with climate change, housing is really central in the preoccupations of most citizens. Municipalities have mobilized to find solutions, but of course, they can't do it alone. So it's collaboration with other orders of government in order to improve the output of our efforts and meet the demand that's there. As I said, the infrastructure investment is very important as well, because otherwise no infrastructure, no water, no houses. The housing has to meet the needs of the population, so partners have to behave as partners.
Hugh Morantz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Keesmaat, question for you. I have so many questions for you. I guess I'll start with the issue of density. I think if you did a poll and you asked people, do you believe that we should have more density in urban centers, you'd have an overwhelmingly positive response. But when somebody buys a 100-foot lot across the street from your house and wants to subdivide it into two 50-foot lots, all hell breaks loose. And I think that's sort of the fundamental problem we have. And you touched on zoning being part of the solution to this problem. And I'm wondering if you could just, as briefly as you can, because my time is limited, talk about the types of zoning changes you think municipalities should be adopting that would make more development for housing as of right.
Thank you for the question. It's a really critical question. The good news is that in many Canadian cities, we've already passed the Rubicon of recognizing that we need higher density development. And I think that is for two reasons. One is that newcomers obviously are priced out of housing, but also people are seeing as a next generation of Canadians being priced out of housing and are recognizing that we need a fundamentally different approach. As of right zoning, which is being facilitated in some ways through the Housing Accelerator Fund, requirements and pressures from the Minister of Housing today are having a profound impact on upending exclusionary zoning across Canada. I think we have, well, in Toronto we did this almost 2 years ago, but Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, some other smaller municipalities have already followed suit and are now allowing up to 4 units on a single lot. And I think we will see additional municipalities embrace that. That's a very incremental form of change. We also need to be really building significant density around our transit infrastructure to ensure that new Canadians have the choice of getting where they need to go without a car.
And I note Mike Moffat was recently was co-author of a report with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I believe you know him. I think you've written with him as well. And in that report, I found it very interesting. There were recommendations around tax changes. And we haven't really talked much about it at this table, but it seems to me that there could be significant changes to the Income Tax Act that could incentivize home building, things like allowing a deferral of the capital gains tax, for example, when the money is invested in new low-income housing, or accelerated capital cost allowance for a similar type of purpose. I remember back in my early days practicing law, there was a program called the MERB program, the Multi-Unit Residential Building Program, that allowed people to deduct the capital cost allowance against soft costs and personal and professional income. That program got hundreds of thousands of units built. Would you be, just, I'm probably running short on time, I'm not sure, Mr. Chair. 2 minutes, good, okay. What do you think of those types of approaches? In addition to the zoning change, it's got to be, one of the witnesses said here recently, we need the Swiss Army knife approach to getting houses, over 3 million houses built in this country by 2030. Would you agree that these types of tax changes would be helpful?
Absolutely. I mentioned that there's things we need to do with land, which is the zoning. There's things we need to do with design, which is building different types of housing from secondary suites to six-story buildings, but there's also financial mechanisms that need to change. The model that you've referenced is the model that's used south of the border. It's used in the U.S. Almost every single affordable housing unit built in America is built as a result of a very unique approach to tax incentives that results in the investment in affordable housing. And these tax credits have fundamentally changed delivery of affordable housing in America.
Mr. Chair, how am I doing for time?
30 seconds or so.
Okay, Mr. Butler, I just want to tell you, you have a very colorful Twitter feed. And I just want to say, I love the tweet about the debt. You say, this is such a striking, I won't say the 3 letters, moment. This is such a blank moment. Doubling the debt is just awful. And you're commenting on another quote that showed that the federal government has actually doubled our federal debt from 2015 of about $600 billion to $1.2 billion. Could you just briefly comment on your concerns around that?
Well, the whole thing devolves back to, and there was a comment earlier about getting back to 2% interest rates. 2% interest rates are genuinely dangerous. They genuinely are. There is a reason why prices expanded so rapidly in the decade of extremely low interest rates. Because the bottom line is, and people alluded to the idea of that investment, why are we investing so much money in real estate? If it's an 80% or a 95% leveraged investment at a rate that's below inflation, you're going to have a lot of participants, and that will drive up the price of houses. Absolutely. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Morantz. And now to MP Zarowitz, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm so sorry. It took me a minute to unmute myself. I want to start off by saying a huge thanks to all the presenters. Very important discussion, a lot of excellent recommendations and options for our committee to consider as we move forward. I'm going to start off with a question to Ms. Keesmaat. Ms. Keesmaat, leaders like Maureen Fair, who runs West Neighborhood House, are probably one of about 6 groups that have approached me over the last few years who would like to, who have land, who have capital, who have drawings, who've done a lot of work, who are trying to build affordable housing or housing for our most vulnerable. And I wonder if you have, I know that you had talked about the incentives are not there and there's not enough money, but I wonder if you could be maybe more specific about what more we can do, whether it's at the federal, provincial, and municipal level, to actually help support groups like West Neighborhood House to get going on building on the land and and using their capital.
Thank you for the question. Access to capital is really critical for the delivery of affordable housing specifically, and the cost of capital can be the deterrent to being able to build that housing. The RCFI program, which delivered a significant amount of rental housing specifically in the City of Toronto over the course of the past decade, has more recently been criticized because it also delivered luxury rental housing. There was kind of this assumption that any rental housing was affordable housing, which we all know in large metropolitan centers is not the case.
RCFI, sorry. Can you just, what is RCFI?
Sure, my apologies. The Rental Construction Financing Incentive, which essentially is a CMHC program that allows for interest-free borrowing for the construction costs of rental housing. And this was a way of getting around the challenge of borrowing for the construction period, which in a condo is less of a challenge because the monies from the pre-sale are used to finance the construction. But of course, in rental housing, because you're not selling anything, you don't have those pre-construction monies. So the rental construction financing program, which is referred to as RCFI, has actually been the program that has incentivized the rental housing that you have seen built over the past decade. It's been a really critical and important program. However, it now needs to be recalibrated to do 2 things. It needs to be recalibrated to respond to higher interest rates because today it's not viable. Today the program doesn't work. It was designed in a low interest rate environment, so it needs to be restructured. That's the first change. The second change is it can be redesigned, and it should be redesigned to specifically incentivize affordable housing and to link into municipal programs like the municipal program in the City of Toronto, where there's a series of incentives for building at 100% of AMR. Depending on how that program is calibrated at CMHC, so essentially just lowering the cost of borrowing for the construction period, that in turn can make projects like Maureen Fair's project viable to build today.
Thank you. And then I'll turn my attention to Ms. Fair over at West Neighborhood House. Thanks for your leadership and everything you do at West Neighborhood House, and thanks so much for being here today. You had mentioned some of the challenges you were having, and you also mentioned some of the good programs that our federal government has, including the Rapid Housing Project. One of the other programs we have implemented is the Reaching Home Canada's Homelessness Strategy, and I know we implemented over $290 million to tackle homelessness specifically in Toronto. I know that we have a lot more to do. We have way too many homeless still. Do you have any thoughts about the roles the federal, provincial, municipal government needs to play moving forward to end chronic homelessness once and for all?
That's a fairly difficult question, Julie. The housing benefit could really use some rework and redesign. So in addition to building affordable housing, portable housing benefits to stack on affordability as people need it, because presumably and hopefully many people don't need the full deeply affordable housing all the time. So those portable benefits can be very useful. The housing benefit really did need to be redesigned. It had some things in it like requiring you to get your landlord to you had to disclose your income and income source to your landlord. Like that's a privacy violation, and it leads to all sorts of perverse consequences. So there's a number of things in there that could be done. There was not enough of the housing benefit funding allocated, but those are the kinds of things that can get people off the street into some housing, and then as they progress, get more stable in their lives, get the care they might need for their mental health issues and substance use issues, although not all homeless have that, then they don't need maybe those deeper subsidies, and they can be used for other people. So there is a role for portable housing benefits, and that's probably what I would answer to that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Zarowitz.
I think that's my time. Okay.
That is your time. We are at our third round, members. I'm going to have to be a bit of a truncated round, so I am going to cut people short if I need to. But we've had these excellent expert witnesses with us with terrific recommendations, so we want to continue. And I've got MP Chambers for the first 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Keesmaat, you've mentioned the GST rebate as something that moves the needle. What about development charges that we've seen continuing to go up significantly? In particular, and I note Toronto as an example, just before the last municipal election, increased development charges, in some cases almost by 100% per unit. All of those costs need to be financed and then eventually passed on. What should the federal government do, or how should they work with municipalities so that if the federal government gives a tax break, it's just not eaten up by another level of government?
Thank you for the question. I think you raise a critical catch-22, and part of this has to do with the desire by most municipalities to minimize their own tax increases. And as a result, one of the easy ways they've been able to pay for infrastructure without anyone really noticing is by increasing development charges on new projects and using those development charges to subsidize the building of infrastructure, ensuring the toilets will flush, ensuring that the water will come out of the taps when you build the new building. And there has been in many municipalities across Canada an approach to infrastructure where new development both pays for itself but also subsidizes the existing tax base and existing infrastructure. So for example, in the City of Toronto, 50% of the development charge goes to the new development, and 50% of that development charge gets spread across the city. So I used to say when I was chief planner, every time we build a condo in downtown Toronto, Scarborough gets a new road paved, or they get a new park, because that's the gift that new homeowner gives. So we need a new model for funding infrastructure if we want to address the development charge problem, because right now development charges have been used as a way to fund infrastructure in the absence of having a larger strategy for funding infrastructure, and in the absence of municipalities having the guts to raise property taxes, which would be the other way to do it.
Thank you very much. Would you also suggest that, for example, in the City of Toronto, the double land transfer tax acts in the same subsidized or cross-subsidization way?
Well, it does, and it also has an unintended consequence of maintaining people in too much housing. So because of the land transfer tax, households that previously would have downsized because there are empty bedrooms, the kids have moved out, now have a disincentive to downsize because they're going to be taxed in doing so. So the land transfer tax has also resulted in some wonky outcomes in terms of being able to ensure that families are living in homes that have been designed for families.
Thank you. So just to summarize, new home purchasers, or any home purchasers really, in particular in the City of Toronto, are subsidizing other infrastructure needs of the city than what you would think that they're paying for when they purchase a new home or have to pay double land transfer tax. Is that about right?
That is entirely correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Butler, FCAC, which is the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, has asked banks to allow certain customers in some circumstances to extend amortizations beyond what is normally allowed. At the same time, OSFI is out banging the B20 drum that you can't have amortization extensions, that you must enforce B20 guidelines on renewals, potentially maybe not for insured mortgages, but certainly for uninsured mortgages. Do you get the sense that OSFI and FCAC are working kind of against each other? What's your interpretation of what's happening at the regulatory level?
There's a general appearance that the agencies don't communicate. The simplest reaction should be this. For people in genuine financial hardship, we're in this incredible acceleration of interest rates at the steepest, fastest in the history of this country. If they are in genuine trouble on their renewal, that they can't afford to make those payments, then that should be provable financial hardship. There's no reason not to extend to 30 years or 30, even 35 years. But OSFI is also correct. The idea of just infinitely extending out amortization is a demand stimulus. There's just no question of that. So it needs to be handled in the correct way, but I think we also have to take the approach that there are some people who had a 2.49% rate, and now they have nearly a 6% rate, and it's a difficult problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Chambers MP Thompson, please, for 5 minutes.
There I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the witnesses. It's been an incredibly interesting afternoon. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Kesmet, if I could, and to really to speak about the importance of densification in really addressing the housing crisis, but with the lens of the, we'll call it the values of philosophy that of your company, that, obviously it's affordable, it's sustainable, but it's beautiful, and it's connected to transit. My province, Newfoundland and Labrador, will often reference much of that as place and how we live in a place, the smaller place where we reside, but also the larger community. And that obviously lends itself to well-being, the sense of connectivity, the sense of community. So I'm really interested if you could link that into the need to really look at density.
Thank you for the question. We're going through a really fundamental shift in terms of both how we pay for housing, how we think about housing, and also how we think about quality of life. And I'll give you just a personal anecdote with respect to that, because I have a 23-year-old daughter, and when we were presenting to the city our project Tyndale Green in the north of the city, which is 6-story buildings, 8-story buildings in a walkable community with an affordable daycare and a new community center and a cafe and food at the center of the development, my daughter, who has grown up in a single-family home at Yonge and Eglinton in the core of the city, texted me and said, "Mom, can I live there?" And I think this is really important because it reflects two things. It reflects how young people think differently about housing than we may have thought about housing in the past, and that they want something different than many of us may have in the past thought about in terms of housing. And also, many new immigrants have thought about housing in the past, the Canadian dream of a single-family home. That has shifted significantly. And today we know that access to stable housing in an environment where people can be a part of a community, where the home can be affordable over time, is the key priority. And one of the ways that we achieve that is through building higher density communities that are focused not around the car, but around community places, community spaces, high quality public parks, and also, where possible, public transit, cycling infrastructure. And we know that there's an entire generation and newcomers who are very passionate about that part of the Canadian dream. And one of the ways we know this is that you can look at home prices in communities that offer all of those amenities, and they're the highest. And one of the fastest growing areas in Canada is the 14 square kilometers of downtown Toronto, where nearly 500,000 people live in 14 square kilometers, and 75% of the residents in that area do not own a car and primarily walk or take transit to get to work. So shifting and thinking about housing in a fundamentally different way, and then designing and delivering that housing in a different way, is both more affordable from the perspective of overall household costs, but it also fits with our sustainability objectives as a country.
Thank you, and I really appreciate that, because it's something that I think is incredibly important as we move forward and understand what our housing and what our communities need to look like. I want to just shift for a second to Ms. Fair, and somewhat a similar conversation around housing very much being a continuum, and homelessness in truest form is in that moment, not having that place to call home, but also understanding, and I've worked in the sector, so I appreciate what you do. It's more complicated than that, because for some, it's about availability of a unit. For others, it's much more complicated, and they need levels of support to be able to sustain housing. Could you speak about the role of your community center, but not-for-profits and community supports with layers of government to really address the complexities of homelessness, so that we understand the continuum of need and the need to have supports along that continuum?
I do need
Certainly, thank you for the
and I
question.
apologize, but I do need a very short answer, please. Thank you.
Yes, there's a need for additional supports, but I would say income and affordable housing access will do a lot to reduce the needs.
Well, thank you, MP Thompson. I apologize for that, and Ms. Fair. And now over to MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame.
Thank you again, Chair. Madam Mayor, you spoke of the importance of protecting the currently established housing, the housing stock. That would be a priority for the government. Could you please give us more details on that issue? Yes, thank you. Well, it's all very well to build new housing, and we're organizing ourselves for doing that, but we're losing affordable units which are currently on the market or available for various reasons. So we should, in fact, try to reserve some funding for access to some of this accessible and affordable housing that is currently available on the market. It would take about 20% of private market available units to meet the affordability threshold. Now we know that in BC, for example, they have a $500 million acquisition budget for the purchase of these private homes or private residences. Of course, the quality of the building, the health standards, safety, etc., also have to meet certain standards in order to avoid the depreciation, the loss of value of some of our assets, housing assets. So we have to continue to invest. If something is unsafe, unsound, they're going to go to renovations, and renovations may cost a lot if you're going to have a rental unit and it's been upgraded several times. Well, we'd like to preserve existent housing, because affordable housing is existent housing. No time for another question?
Yeah, merci. MP Blakey, please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Farah from the Shift, I wanted to ask, we haven't talked yet today about a nonprofit acquisition fund, but we have talked about the importance of access to capital. Of course, that's a big problem for nonprofits. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the question of what a nonprofit acquisition fund could mean, well, I guess specifically for trying to arrest the loss of affordable and social housing.
Sure. Thanks for the question. An acquisition fund would be really important for nonprofits in particular, who, especially those nonprofits committed to providing actual affordable housing. And I just want to clarify what we're talking about here. There are about 1 million renter households in core housing need in this country. That their average earnings are about 25 grand a year. That means they can afford a rent at 30% of their income of approximately $550 a month. So there's affordable and then there's affordable. And nonprofits have been playing that role, and they cannot compete in this so-called market against the big buyers in this country. And there are conglomerates, big corporations that have way more access to capital than do even smaller developers like Ms. Keesmaat, for example. And I'm sure she's come up against this, where, it's difficult to compete against a big developer or a big real estate investment trust that has access to more capital. So those acquisition funds and the right of first refusal for both city governments and not-for-profit corporations is super important. And it could lead to, yes, less loss of affordable housing, but also the creation of more affordable housing.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Blakey, MP Lawrence.
Merci. Pour les prochains.
Thank you for the following questions. My questions will be for. We've heard from Gagnon that the decisions of the Liberal government have these resulted in the increase in interest rates. And as a result, would this result if interest rates were reduced in more affordable units? Well, I'll repeat as I did since I initially spoke this afternoon. This is what we're hearing from developers that we work with at the municipal level. It's just a matter of doing the math. Interest rates have a very important effect on the cost of a development project, and this is why we're looking for greater accessibility, a more flexible CMHC programs, for example. We'd like to see some concrete reactions from their CHMC, and of course the social responsibility of banks come into play here.
Just in general, maybe to Ms. Tour and Mr. Butler, we, of course, are undertaking a setting with respect to the housing market. You would have a particularly good insight, I would think, or a good sightline into what the housing market looks like right now. I'll start with you, Ms. Tour, and then maybe to you, Mr. Butler. If you could just give me an overview of what you see in the housing market right now.
Well, the one thing that we've, I speak to brokers like Mr. Butler every day who are members, and Canadians have shown a tremendous amount of resilience in the face of higher interest rates. Now, will that resilience continue? We do see precursors to higher default rates, which are the defaults that we've seen in auto and credit card debt has also increased, and we're starting to see the defaults rise. So that is a growing concern. Certainly, consumers that are coming up for renewal in the next 3 years, I believe 75% of consumers will come up for renewal, and they may have had a rate of 2%. I know currently my interest rate is 1.69. So I am one of those consumers that when I experience a rate increase, it will be my husband and I will experience some sticker shock. So those are two very large concerns. The other concern is that despite the decrease in housing prices, we actually haven't seen many first-time home buyers access the market. And that to me indicates that there is a problem with down payment. Saving for a 20% down payment in the Greater Toronto or Greater Vancouver area is near impossible on a single person's income. That's why we need to have incentives in place that will help first-time home buyers access the market.
Over to you.
Ultimately, I hope that we just don't repeat mistakes we've made in the past. Ultra-low interest rates and stimulus in the demand side creates astronomically high price increases. I mean, in not every part of Canada, certainly, but in Ontario and in British Columbia, we saw at some points prices were rising 2% a month in parts of Ontario and in British Columbia, and that's something that we must guard against in the future. That's something that we can't let happen again because it's harmful to everyone, particularly the people who bought at those particularly high prices.
Thank you, MP Lawrence, and now to MP Baker. MP Baker, you'll be our final questioner. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Chair. So as some of you may have heard at the tail end of question period, my dad's visiting the proceedings in the House today for the first time, and he's actually here with us today in the committee hearing. So welcome, Dad. And thank you for that warm welcome,
Baker,
folks. I really appreciate that. Dad, they always applaud this way when I speak. But when as you all know, I represent a community called the Etobicoke Centre, and we have a relatively small francophone community. But when I was a kid, my parents insisted that I learn French, and both my mom and dad worked very hard to make sure that happened. So, both because I have a question for Madame Fournier, and also because I want to show my dad that he got his effort paid off, I will ask a question en français. Madame Fournier, vous avez parlé.
Madame Fournier, you talked about the rapid construction initiative. Now, I have very, very limited time, so I'll be quick as I can. What has been the impact of that program? And what would be your ask to the government in their next budget? Well, thank you very much. Yes, you learned your lessons well in French. It has made an extremely positive improvement in tying down the proper financing of some of these. A Home for All is, or Home First program, I think, is a major program, significant, and shovels in the ground next spring, I think, because thanks to the other programs. We've seen a rapid increase in homelessness in our province. And I think the best response to this is to make sure that we get housing for these people. A federal program that is both efficient and timely would help us enormously at the community and municipal level, particularly given the urgency of the need. So we can only repeat that it would be very important. We hope to see some good news in the fall financial statement, we hope. And if a program is working, we have to use it optimally and constantly and meet the needs. Well, thank you very much for your answer, and glad to hear what the impact has been. And thank you for articulating your ask to the federal government.
P.S. Bendayan, if I may.
Excellent français, chers collègues, et merci pour la réponse, Madame Fournier.
excellent French colleague, and thank you, Madame Fournier. I'd like to thank the witnesses and Mr. Chair.
To move the motion that I put on notice on Thursday last, that the chair of the committee immediately report to the House that the committee, 1, celebrates the Canada Pension Plan as the foundation of a secure and dignified retirement for tens of millions of Canadians and a pillar of Canada's economy. 2, recognizes the important contribution of the Quebec Pension Plan, which was established independently at the same time as the Canada Pension Plan. And 3, stands with the majority of Albertans who are opposed to Premier Danielle Smith's dangerous plan to withdraw from the Canada Pension Plan that threatens the pensions of millions of seniors and hardworking Canadians from coast to coast. Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, I would like to hear from colleagues and move to a vote as quickly as possible.
Okay. All right. Thank you, P.S. Bendayan. I do have, I think, was it Chambers or Lawrence? Okay, MP Chambers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To break the suspense, we won't be having a vote on this motion tonight, but we can chat all night if we like. Obviously, Conservatives can't support the last tenet of the motion. Conservatives are on the record saying that the CPP should be there for all Canadians except for Quebec, who has their own pension plan and they do things just fine, but that the CPP should be protected for Albertans and Canadians. As a member of Parliament from Ontario, if you were to look at the methodology used for costing, I think some people have questions about that. That's obviously something that should be looked further into, but Conservatives will absolutely not support the motion as it is currently written. There are plenty other ways that the government can use this issue to make political statements. We won't allow it in this form to make it to the House. If they want to offer some potential amendments, we would take them under consideration. But certainly, I and my colleagues would be well placed here this evening to talk for as long as we have resources. But I would hope that we would consider allowing our witnesses go. I think we're about 5 minutes or 2 minutes away before the end of the meeting. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll move to adjourn.
Are you adjourning the debate or the meeting?
On the motion.
Okay. Clerk?
Mr. Baker? I vote no. Ms. Bendayan?
No.
Mr. Weiler?
Nay.
Ms. Zarowitz?
Sadly, nay.
Ms. Thompson?
No.
Mr. Chambers?
Yes.
Mr. Halan?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Oui.
Mr. Morans?
He's away, but I'll vote in favor in his place.
That's correct, Mr. Cramp. I got the, sorry about that. Mr. Sainte-Marie?
Oui.
Mr. Blakey?
No.
Yeas pour 5, 5. Nays contre 6, 6.
Okay. Peter, we continue.
Point au règlement, Monsieur le Président, étant donné...
Point of order. Given can we thank our witnesses for their contributions, and I'd be prepared to stay until we finish our discussions here.
But yet we want to thank our expert witnesses for your testimony, for the many questions they answered, for your recommendations. We thank you for informing our study on housing here in Canada, and we really appreciate your time. And at this time, that you may go. Thank you, on behalf of the committee. Okay. So I've got MP Lawrence and then PS Bendayan.
Monsieur le Président, je vous signale que ma main est levée
Oh,
aussi.
and then MP.
Chair, I'm still here too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, I mean, it's quite clear the NDP Liberal government that times are tougher than ever for Canadians, and the challenges are starting to occur, and even fraying of our national unity. It seems like every time that there is a Trudeau in power, there is a unity crisis that follows. And perhaps that is not a coincidence, whether it be energy policies of the past or future. It seems as though this government, this Liberal NDP government, is intent on creating division across our unity, whether that be across socioeconomic classes or across regions. And never has that been more clear than their exemption with respect to the carbon tax. Of course, Mr. Chair, we heard in this very committee of the inflationary impact. And you know what really sort of bothered me is, because I do hold members of this committee particularly in high regard, is the way it was demagogued in the House of Commons. Everyone heard here the testimony of the Governor of Bank of Canada, Mr. Macklem, that carbon tax was responsible for 0.6%. That equates to 16% of inflation. Yet I heard in the House of Commons members of this committee saying 0.15. That was just untrue. It's factually untrue. And then when I tried to offer evidence and a point of order, unfortunately, the Liberals objected to this. It's as if they're allergic to the truth. And so when we look at the impact of the carbon tax on Canadians, it's crushing. And, the Prime Minister seemed to his credit, get this message to an extent, but only for Atlantic Canadians. And so while that will provide some economic relief to our friends in Atlantic Canada, and quite frankly, I give our Conservative members in Atlantic Canada, Rob Moore, Dr. Ellis, amongst others, Rick Perkins, of course, who's appeared at this committee, a lot of credit for pushing those Atlantic members hard and raising the issue to the point where the Atlantic members, I can only assume, were in full revolt to remove the carbon tax on home fuel. Of course, you also hear the demagoguing that no, this is a Canada-wide project. It is, but it's effectively only the Atlantic Canada because disproportionately, in fact, greatly disproportionately, the exemption on home heating oil affects Atlantic Canada. That's just a fact. And the demagoguing
Point
on
of
the
order,
other
Mr.
side.
Chair. We've been listening to a speech on carbon pricing for some time now, and I would just like to remind all members that we're talking about the Canada Pension Plan in my motion. There's no mention of carbon pricing.
Yeah, so to P.S. Bendayan's motion, please, is what you're speaking to.
Yeah, so
that's a CPP.
So just to, and I will use the fullness of time, as is my rules, as is my right as a parliamentarian. And we know that Liberals through C18 otherwise like to silence opposition, but I won't be silenced because I don't just represent myself. I represent the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, and they duly elected me, and so they won't be silenced. So I will continue, Mr. Chair. So I was talking about the impact of the carbon tax. And just to relate it back out of respect to where I'll tell you where I'm going to end up, is that national unity issues flare up because of this Liberal government and because of Liberal government issues our governments in the past. So, but we were talking about the carbon tax and the impact on national unity of the exemption. And so when, Mr. Chair, I have two children, and I love them absolutely equally. And so if I were to say to them that one child gets treatment over the other, I'd almost be certainly causing disunity and discord in my family. And so, it's really that simple. You can't make a deal with one province and then not make it with the rest of the province. And so this has thrown our entire country into carbon tax chaos. It's putting brother against brother, sister against sister. This is incredibly, incredibly reckless and definitely not worth the risk. And so as we see the exemption, and like I said, I see the demagoguing that goes on in the House of Commons. They say this is a national program, and maybe legally it is, but effectively it disproportionately helps the folks out in Atlantic Canada because they put oil. And one thing that's really been bothering me is that the Minister of Environment will get up there and say, well, we're doing this because home heating oil is really expensive. okay. And so the carbon tax, the whole idea behind the carbon tax is to create to create an impetus for people to switch to other products or other solutions because it is really expensive. So when we look at home heating oil costing folks in Atlantic Canada tens of thousands of dollars, that's mission accomplished. That's what you guys set out to do. That's the goal of the carbon tax, is to make things more expensive. So that's why you put in place a carbon tax, to make things more expensive. That's why it exists. That's the market mechanism. So when the Minister of Environment gets up there shocked, just shocked that,
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Now we're talking about the Minister of Environment as we continue to talk about carbon pricing on a motion that deals with the Canada Pension Plan.
I do call the members' attention back to the motion. The motion is on the CPP.
Yep.
And so MP Lawrence, please, back to the CPP. Speak to the CPP.
Yeah, as I said, I will talk to Unity, and I will talk, as I'm given parliamentary privilege, on behalf of the people of Northumberland, Peterborough South, who voted me, not you, Mr. Chair, not the members of the Liberal Party. In fact, I replaced a Liberal member because they were sick and tired of this government. And so we will continue to talk about the impact of the carbon tax. I know that Liberal members don't want to talk about the impact of the carbon tax, but fortunately, through the incredible democracy that Canada is still possessing, I have the right to talk. And so I will continue to use my parliamentary privilege to talk about national unity crisis caused by this government and the impact of the carbon tax. So, as I was saying, the carbon tax exemption is applying only to 3% of Canadians. And we heard from the Governor of the Bank of Canada, we heard that fully 16% of inflation, or 33% or a third of the inflation over the target, is directly attributable to the carbon tax. So we have a government that's acknowledged that the carbon tax is driving up the cost of living, that it's not the most effective way to reduce emissions. And in fact, they have, for Atlantic Canada, they have done a reversal and said, you know what, we need to invest in technology, not taxes. Well, who said that? Who said that? Oh, I think that was the leader of the official opposition. And so they've said that we need to invest in heat pumps, which is a form of technology. And we need to remove the carbon tax. We need to remove the carbon tax in order to allow people to make the investments that they need in order to be cleaner and to reduce emissions. We need to give people, I believe in the Canadian people, and I believe that where they're given the capital they need to make the right decisions, that when they're not put underneath the gun of an affordability crisis, they will invest in the technology and make the investments that they need in their houses, in their cars, and otherwise to improve the level of emissions. And you know who agrees with me? Well, that's the Prime Minister of Canada, because he just said that. Because he said, you know what, Atlantic Canadians, we need to remove the carbon tax on them so that they can invest in technology. Once again, that sounds real familiar. That sounds really, really
Point of order,
familiar.
Mr. Chair. I do apologize to interrupt my colleague, but and of course he must represent his constituents as we all do, but the subject matter is Canada pension plans, and those words still have not come out of the member's mouth, which is fine. But he has an obligation to be relevant and to be on topic.
Thank you, P.S. Bendayan, and I will hold the member to that. Member, be relevant to what we are discussing. We are discussing P.S. Bendayan's motion on the CPP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I have heard hours and hours and hours of Liberal members talking about everything but a motion. And so I have, with all respect to that member, I believe I am given a wide latitude to discuss things that I find that are relating to the motion. And I find that the carbon tax is is extremely disruptive to national unity. And so we'll continue to discuss that because I believe the two topics are intertwined.
Lawrence, I'm going to interject here because if you want to bring up whatever you want to bring up, make sure that it is intertwined to the CPP.
I will.
Okay, so to the motion that is before us, please.
Perfect. Yeah. So the CPP, as our leader has said, is an important important pension and supporter of Canadians from coast to coast, with the exception of Quebec, who's doing just fine with their own pension plan. What will happen, though, is that if in fact if in fact we continue to go along this line of disunity through providing certain promises with certain exit. I got an echo here. My apologies, there. Can we have Matt maybe not have the Liberal whip staff echoing? That would be awesome. Everything that I'm saying. Sorry. I'm not going after staff, but the echo is frustrating. I didn't insult him, nor would I. He's a great guy. I've talked to him before. I enjoy him. I just could not concentrate with it echoing. Thank you very much. I would never go after staff. They work extremely hard. And in fact, I could maybe talk about that for a while. Yeah, it will be, because they pay the carbon tax as well. But in the spirit of collegiality, I would move to adjourn the meeting.
Is this the debate?
No, the meeting.
Mr. Baker.
No.
Madame Bendayan.
No.
Mr. Weiler.
No.
Ms. Therowitz.
No.
Ms. Thompson.
No.
Mr. Chambers. Yes, Mr. Crum.
In favor.
Mr. Halan.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes.
Mr. Morans.
Yes.
Monsieur Sainte-Marie.
Oui.
Mr. Blakey.
Yes.
Yes pour 6, nays contre 5, 5.
Right. So we are adjourned.